I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Today I'm speaking with Jamie Roberts, and Jamie, it's really nice to see you. It's been, a few months since we've talked, but we've talked
Yes.
2 or 3 times before, so it's really great to see you again.
Thanks for having me back, Leslie.
Yeah, I'm delighted. And you're a canceled author, professor, and author of a canceled book, but your book has just been picked up.
Yeah. So my book came out a year ago when we first talked through an academic publisher. I'm always a bit wary of naming names just in case. But yeah, through an academic publisher. And it spent 2 weeks on the market before it got pulled because of complaints. They never told me who complained or what the complaints were. And the book was investigated and found to be unsound, and they wanted substantial rewrites. And look, to be honest, I'm amazed the book made it as far as it did, because I know how the system works. I knew the academic publisher shouldn't have put it out. I've been around uni for 20 years. I get it, how it works, but it made it as far as it did, and then before it got found out, and they pulled it, which was disappointing, but in a way not surprising. And I was lucky enough to get another publisher, Pitchstone, and they've published Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. So they're like right in the same zone of kind of dissenting academics who are just over everything that we all talk about and that we're all over. But yeah, so Pitchstone picked it up. I'm sort of like, come on, the book's got to come out. These books, it's old. But then the whole US election thing went down, which was really a surprise, because, well, a surprise from the area I'm working in, because out of the blue, I suppose, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Tulsi Gabbard, even RFK Jr., they all in a whoosh suddenly got behind Trump. And suddenly I'm thinking, my goodness, the intellectual dark web, which of course is the title of the book, just won the election. Okay, that's probably an overstatement, but you know how you say these things. And but they did play a significant role, the ideas, the people. And so I sort of was thinking, it's not such a bad time now for the book to come out again. There's been a resurgence. Something of a resurgence of these figures. And so, hopefully my book now goes a fair way to just tying together all the issues that people like you and I are concerned with in like a nice, neat and affordable package to kind of explain a bit what's been going on over the last 10 or so years. But yeah, so it's coming out in a few days, 17th. And that's great.
Very exciting. That's awesome.
Yeah.
For anybody who's hearing about it for the first time, you want to give a really brief synopsis just to get people excited, not give away too much, but give them a reason why
Sure.
what they might find when they open up the book.
Sure, thanks. So the book's called The Intellectual Dark Web, had a slightly different title before. The publisher actually came up with a great subtitle, A History, and then brackets, A Possible Future, which I thought was pretty great, because of course what I've written is a history. I mean, it's a very recent history. It focuses on the years 2016 to 2020, and it's just the whole podcast phenomenon, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers, and then, the sort of sprawling cast of characters that have turned up on their podcasts, everyone from Elon Musk and Steven Pinker to Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang. And the point really is that there's a kind of, even though these are all different people and their politics shift around, the idea still is, or my sense was, that there was still a very coherent set of values. An objection to what we call postmodernism or post-structuralism, political correctness, woke, of course. So they were part of the big early anti-woke pushback. But also ideas about men and women, masculinity and femininity, the idea that, no, we're not blank slates. There is such a thing as masculinity, there is such a thing as femininity, even though these things aren't exactly, they're not exactly the same in every person, but, these are meaningful concepts. Obviously, the whole trans debate is in there, ideas about the West. So, I provide an overview of the intellectual dark web figures, their ideas about these topics, and some analysis, just sort of bring it all together, try to explain what the battle's ultimately about. That sort of thing.
Well, I'm excited to get a hard copy of this. And yeah, thank you so much. What a fantastic conclusion to that year of cancellation, actually having it picked up and published again.
I know, right? Because I don't think I said much to you about it before. I mean, I'm sure I said some things about it, but yeah, the uni experience at that time got pretty heavy as well. And it was, I mean, I had students denouncing me and tutors complaining and people higher up, coming for me with the sort of Kafkaesque mind games, and it was a pretty hectic few months. So it's good to come out the other side and still have a book and have a bit of something of a victory. So yeah.
Yeah. Are you still teaching? You said I think you're not. You're about to go back, aren't you?
Yeah. So it did all get a bit much, and I thought, look, my stress levels are too high. It's affecting my health. It's affecting my family life. And so I did, I took time off in the end. I'm going to go back in a few months. I'm going to try to go back anyway. I mean, I think they often find ways to stop you from going back once they know that you're really not on their team. They make it tough for you. But I'm going back ready to fight. It's interesting because before, when I was, the previous 4 years, I was always trying to talk about these ideas. Whichever course I was teaching, I'd always work in, to a greater or less extent, a discussion of, say, Enlightenment values versus, I guess, what we call postmodern values, and identity politics, culture wars, cancel culture. I'd always find ways to talk about it, but looking back, I was still always a little bit hesitant. Like I'd go in, but I probably didn't go in 100%. And then, at staff meetings, I'd just sit quietly whilst all the, basically all the atrocities happened, and where, various people get denounced or praised for following the ideology. But basically this time around, I realized that part of the stress of the whole experience comes from being in an in-between space. Whereas I guess once you go all in, and just all in, basically nuke the career totally. It's probably going to be, in some ways, easier.
Yeah.
So
that in between space, there's a lot of tension there.
It's tough because, I mean, if you're a total coward and you say nothing, I mean, you're a coward, right? If you go all the way, your days are numbered. You go for the in-between space, not really by choice, but just because that if you go all in, it's going to be intense. But the thing is, they still get you in the in-between space. It's not like you're immune, So, Anyway, these are sort of complex issues, which, I mean, I guess we all ponder. What happens when you're in the corrupt system? How do you respond to it? How do you be true to yourself? And how do you basically just deal with the emotions of it, which is the biggest thing. I suppose if some people are a bit more remote, maybe they're okay. But I think for a lot of people who care about this stuff, they care about it precisely because they are human and connected and emotional. So yeah, it's challenging. Yeah, it's challenging making that many enemies, in your workplace. So it's, a lot of it's, psychological work on yourself. Anyway, we'll see what happens. I plan to document it. That's what I'm going to do as well to make it a bit more sporting, I think. Like, not in the sense of I'll do it all anonymously or whatever, keep it legal, but yeah.
Your experience as you go back. Yeah.
Try to make something a bit more interesting of it, film all my lectures, maybe keep a vlog or something like that, and see where that ends up. I might get some interesting footage.
Do you have a sense that the tide is turning to where it'll be what you have to say or your perspectives would be a little bit more welcome or less? What do you think? What's the temperature of things?
That's the big question, isn't it? When Trump got elected, the immediate feeling was the tide is turning. Did you feel that in the US?
It's hard to say. It's interesting because we have so much division right now around politics with people. Really, the last few weeks, I've just heard from so many people that it becomes this really clear division. Like we have people in our lives that we can't even talk to, or who have told us that they won't talk to us anymore because we don't think the same as them around these things. So
yeah.
I think in some ways, some people were emboldened or felt a little bit more, felt gratified that some things were hopefully going to start to change in a direction that they wanted things to change in. But then the sort of backlash has been so intense emotionally that I think it's kind of a mixed bag, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting hearing that. Yeah, I mean, I guess as I was going to say, when Trump first got in, I think I sent you an article I wrote for The Conversation. And The Conversation's meant to be sort of a free speech, open-minded publication. I think in reality it leans left. But I was grateful that my editors published my article. The intellectual dark web just won the election, and they even featured it. So they felt like it was a moment where we could talk about these things. And look, like, even regardless of what you think about, things like abortion and those more heavy issues, I mean, this is still ultimately just about good faith, open discussions, certainly what I'm doing. And so I felt like there was a moment where that was the case for a little while, and people on the left were saying, yeah, maybe there's a problem with this woke thing. They were actually saying it. But then, I have felt, it feels to me like just in the last few weeks, that the left is the left, alas, because it's not even really the left, whatever it is, whatever this beast is. But yeah, it does feel like it's, been regrouping and doubling down. So, I don't, partly when this is sort of a Schadenfreude thing, I'm thinking, we're going to win and my book won't have come out. Oh, well. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just being honest about shallow aspects of my thinking. But then, then I think, oh no, there's still plenty of work to be done. Oh, good, I can get into the battle.
The timing is everything.
That's not the right way.
No,
that's not quite the right way to think about it all. But the thought does cross my mind.
Well, it's that's hard though, because
I think it's still going.
You put this out and you put these thoughts together and tried to express them at a time when you wanted to say that, and that cancellation is like it's like a muzzling. I mean, it silences the thoughts that you're trying to express pretty effectively. And so now, it's not your fault that they're coming out so much later, but it sort of feels like a potential missed window of opportunity to speak about this at a time when it was still, fresh, but it is, as you say, still happening. So there's still plenty of discussion to be had.
Yeah, I know. I mean, timing is everything. You're either too early or too late much of the time. I mean, honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's just the great snakes and ladders of life. But yeah.
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 No, that's true. And there was something you said that I was just going to pick up on, and now it's escaping me. So one of the other things that you brought up that I thought was really interesting, and maybe the light bulb will go off in a minute, and I'll get back to what I was just thinking to ask you. But you said in an email, you said that you would be perhaps interested in talking about first principles of therapy. And I thought this really piqued my interest. You said, I think a lot about the extent to which a therapist should pursue a moral agenda. I can't help thinking he or she should, though my sense of what that agenda is quite specific. So I'm not sure how such things would work. In short, I think that we humans suffer when we sacrifice genuine human connection, and that plays out in a lot of different ways. So I'm really intrigued, and I want to hear about this because this is something I've thought about too, and I've tried to engage in a dialogue about a lot of these thoughts I had during my counseling education when stuff like sexual morality came up, and we were only told what was bad and that everything else was to be welcomed. So cis heteronormativity was the bad guy, but openness, inclusiveness, LGBT, kink, these kinds of things were all things that we were explicitly supposed to be non-shaming about, and that we were supposed to welcome these as normal variants of human behavior, relationships, expression, etc. So it felt like, well, you're telling me that we cannot be tethered to this concept of old-fashioned sexuality, the thing that they call cis heteronormativity. And so you have to pull up your moral anchor and not tether it there, not place any kind of value or normalcy in that. We're supposed to, decenter it. And yet, where is my anchor now? What am I anchoring, and from what position do I state this new ethic or this new moral perspective that I'm supposed to be having? And it felt like it was floating. It felt like a very floating moral perspective. Like there is nothing that you're anchored in. And I think that the same could be said for lots of parts of life. So what is therapy? And I've been very critical of the therapy fields. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I work as a coach. I do something that's completely non-clinical, that doesn't address mental health. It's more philosophical, more just discussions with people. But I have been very critical of therapy because as it's being taught right now, I'm not sure what its purpose really is. So I'm wondering, I'm curious about your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. And I mean, it's great that we can have this talk. I'm just trying to even think about where to begin, but this is proper first principles thinking. So, I mean, I'll step through it, think out loud, basically, see what I can say. But so, I mean, we go to therapy, let's say, because something's not right, probably in our thoughts. Something's not right in how we're living our life. What is that not right? I'm asking myself. So then something we're doing is in clash with something deeper about who we are. So the question is, what is this anchor about who we are? I mean, if you're a Christian, it's a little easier because there'll be a whole kind of, I suppose you'd call it moral code that is somehow embedded in you, perhaps speaks to you through your conscience, let us say, which is the connection of God within you. I'm, alas, not a Christian. I have Christian friends and relatives, and I talk about it a lot, but it hasn't yet called to me in a sufficiently convincing way. But I share very similar ethics because I still believe in this thing called conscience. And so then I ask myself, well, what is this conscience? I mean, partly it's going to be social values, but but partly it's going to be human nature. And so this is, of course, what then, in my thinking, takes us away from the kind of postmodern blank slate type thinking, which you alluded to with any sexuality as possible, to what do our natures really want? And this is the huge question. And it's a pretty taboo question, but I mean, my sense, to jump to the conclusion, is that I guess I mentioned in that email I sent, but our natures want genuine human connection, which means being quite open with someone else, and also the other person having a regard for you and you having a regard for them, and building a long-term relationship. I think that's a sort of a deep natural part of our being. And I think it makes sense as well if you think about how we evolved. We would have evolved, I mean, pretty obviously, I don't think it's controversial to say, in tribal situations where we did form long-term relationships with people. And so, I mean, there's so much to say to ultimately establish this more rigorously, but it does strike me that, you know, long-term sort of faithful relationships are actually better for the psyche, in a sense. They're more healthy. And so this, you know, ties back around obviously to what you're saying. If we've got a therapy world which says, you know, anything goes and that's fine. I'll tell you some other things I could say, because I think I can't remember if I mentioned this, but I'm sure I did mention it to you. Like, the next book I want to write, when I finally get a moment, I think it's going to be called Men and Women, but I want to trace these ideas, and I want to trace them through what I'm most into, which is literature. Because I feel like, you know, you've had me on and let me talk about literature before, but, you know, works that have stood the test of time, like Shakespeare's Hamlet, I feel like they have very deep truths in them, which are better and deeper in a way even than what you can get in a scientific paper. And that if you can really work through these works and then join them in with our own experiences, there's a lot to learn. Anyway, I'm digressing a bit there, but and Louise Perry talks about this in her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. But it does seem pretty clear that that men have two aspects to their nature, you know, and I feel this so strongly in myself, like unbelievably strongly. I could talk about this for days, and I struggled with this in my early 20s and even had a mental breakdown over it. You know, the two ways you can go as a man is like the womanizing path, which I think at its extreme, it's like war and rape at the extreme. In more moderate versions, it's just a lot of sexual partners, a lot of seduction, maybe low-level sexual assault. I don't know. I'm thinking about the various men I know who have gone down that path. And then the other path is the long-term loving relationship path. And, you know, I could feel in my own psyche that there is a pull in both directions. But if I go down that path, I know that I am sacrificing genuine human connection. And I know that, you know, if I become a womanizer and just use women for sex, that at a fundamental level, I'm disregarding that person's well-being. I can feel that within me. It requires that step. And when I talk to womanizers I've known over the years, they all say the same thing. They know what they're doing, and they know they've stepped into the dark place. So that's kind of like the male psyche. And so when you then have therapists, and I've heard this. I mean, I've got you know, friends who are, what could you say, you know, promiscuous, and they've had therapists who are saying, yeah, it's great, you can just have lots of partners. It's just, you're just working through it. And then I'm thinking, what are the kinds of men you're working through this with? I think you're working through it with men at their worst, you know, without question. I mean, without question for me. And frankly, so I'm jumping around a bit here. I tried to write my honors thesis about this at university back in 2002, because when I first started coming across all this sexual revolution stuff, it just didn't sit right with me, knowing what I knew as, you know, myself as a man. And yeah, that's when I first got my first soft cancellation, as I call it, because obviously you're not allowed to talk about these things at university. But yeah, anyway, back to the therapy point. I'll tie it all back around. Yeah, to me, with all this sort of sexual politics, you cannot escape the morality of it. And this is the point. It's not just something loose that you argue about. It's like, I think I might have said this before, you might think you're done with morality, but is morality done with you? And when morality has a hold on you, whether you like it or not, that's when we really have to listen. The blank slate view of the human mind pushes that aside. But so, I mean, ultimately, the very simple point I'm making is that, perhaps a lot of people are dissatisfied or unhappy because they don't have strong relationships. And if you're encouraged and pushed into a world where you're just an atomized pleasure seeker, you're a consumer of, all the wonderful things that capitalism gives us, and you're a consumer of people and pleasures and fetishes, yet there's no deep connection in your life with yourself, with others. To me, that is, maybe not with everyone, but to me, that's a source of serious psychological damage. So that's kind of, when I sent you that email, these are the kinds of thoughts I'm thinking. And I'm saying, so surely then therapy, relationships, a morality you can't escape, these are things which need to be very, very seriously considered. And when you're then, encouraging men to just be promiscuous, you're encouraging them to behave at their worst. And when you're encouraging women to do that, you're not only enabling the worst men, but you're also sending women into experiences with men who ultimately don't care about them. And it's a tragic thing. It's a tragic thing when you speak to women, as I do from time to time about these things, and you get these sort of confessions like, every relationship I've had is bad, or, no one's ever really cared about me. And those are pretty deep, sad things. Mm-hmm. And then when you have therapists not touching that because, sexual liberalism is the name of the game today. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big problem. So that's mostly what I wanted to say. Maybe I could have structured it a little better, but I hit the points.
No, I love that.
It's the point that therapy has to engage with morality, but it actually, I think, has to engage with quite a specific morality, which is not the one that's particularly popular. Certainly not in leftish circles.
I think, when as you're speaking, something that's sort of coming to my mind is this, when you're talking about like the two parts of the male psyche, and what is the morality? What is it anchored in? I'm thinking, well, psyche means soul, right? I mean, we're not talking about the mind, we're talking about the soul when we say psyche. And when you say, I could do this, and I know that if I do this, and I know that when I talk to men who do this, there's a part of them that knows that was not right, that they're following a path that doesn't ultimately lead to greater flourishing, happiness, connection, whatever that is, something moral, something that's in alignment with a deeper thing. But if say morality or therapy has forgotten that there is a soul, or doesn't care about the soul or the spirit of the human, then what does it believe in? It believes in these material things. It believes in like this medical, data, analytic kind of process-based life, without any kind of spark of something divine in us. And if we become unanchored from whatever is divine or mysterious, or that source of life and magic that's inside, and say that there is something that guides us that we don't have a science to understand, if we fail to acknowledge that, or if we deny that, then what can our morality be based on except data and atomization? So I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? Is that kind of something that's missing from the conversation?
Yeah. So you're phrasing it in. I mean, it's really interesting to hear how you phrase it. But it's just so hard, because so often when I'm talking about this, or when I hear you talking, like a huge part of me, I want to convince people. And when you talk about the soul and something mysterious, I'm on board with you 100%. But it's like, how can you get this across, especially to people who, let's say, they're not Christians? And I mean, it's kind of useful. I'm not a Christian, and yet,
yeah, I'm not a Christian either. But
yeah, okay, but but that sense of something deeper. I mean, it's interesting. You said mysterious. I feel like this is why I really want to write this next book. I feel like with a couple of 100 pages and Shakespeare by my side, I feel like I can make it a lot less mysterious, you know. But yeah, there is a deeper morality, conscience, or something that speaks within us that we can't avoid. And we need to attend to that. But it's just, as you're talking as well, I can feel all the eye rolls from the eye rollers, thinking, "Oh, that's so old-fashioned. It's so naive. It's, you know, we get rid of that in the 1960s with the glorious sexual revolution? Didn't we throw all that aside?" But that's what's interesting about this era as well. Is it's like, great, we've given this 60 years. I don't know if it has helped all that much. We've run the experiment. We've told women that gender is a social construction, and I don't know, just to go down another difficult path. I mean, I was married for 20 years basically, and I didn't intend to separate. Let's put it that way. I had no intention. I was in it for the long haul, but then having separated. For a while there, I thought I'd just be alone, but you become lonely, and the loneliness is once you've basically shared a bed with someone and a sort of a deep love for 20 odd years, you realize that's a very important aspect of life. But yeah, I had to rediscover myself as a man, and work out, how to even find a girlfriend again or something like that. And I mean, look, I say this, I'm an oversharer, but I say this because for 20 years or 30 years at uni, I've been aggressively told that gender's a social construction, which of course, there's a whole nother discussion of that with trans, which, flips it again. But certainly my experience of having to rediscover myself as a man in my mid-40s is, sure, people have been aggressively saying it, but it's not the case. There is quite a specific way that I have to be as a man to be attractive and to actually, find a relationship. So that's been very, very interesting for me. The reason I talk about all of this is because I'm back then considering these horrible things I had to consider in my early 20s that I thought I was done with. Do I go down this path, the dark path, or do I go down the other path, the good path? And, you can sort of hear the dark path again. But yeah, basically, even in reflecting on myself and then writing this book about the intellectual dark web, listening to people like Jordan Peterson, writing a chapter on masculinity, and realizing that there is actually a righteous middle path, which is pretty good, in fact, where, you have to be, it is important to be strong and capable. It is important to be on a mission and have, quite strong vision in life about what you want to achieve. But it's also important to be kind and loving and devoted and all of these things. And it's easy to say all this stuff now, but to kind of identify a middle path and then become at peace with that and sort of feel the rightness of it. It brings me back around again to this sort of question of morality and the core and the soul and something mysterious. And I feel like having to rediscover myself as a man, I've had to, listen to that core and work out how to bring it into being in a way in the world that is strong, but at the same time not injurious to the feminine. And so, this is why I wrote that to you, and I'm glad we can talk about it, because it's like there is, and look, it's not going to be exactly the same for all people, I mean, this is what's so difficult to talk about these things. We are talking about bell curves. We are talking about distributions. We are all a little different. And yet, despite the fact that there is variability, I think there is still a strong sameness. I mean, when I think about, how things I've heard over in recent times, how like womanizers here tell me they pick up women, to how men in Iran tell me they pick up women, to how whatever, it's like, it's all the same. It's all bad. It's all the same. So despite all the apparent variability, there's still a lot of sameness. And so yeah, just to tie it up again, my sense is that therapy, if it's trying to give us some sort of peace of mind and bring us some, and I don't think you ever really get peace of mind. I mean, like the Buddhists say, life is suffering to a degree, but if you can have a better life, you have to deal with these things. And I think you are inevitably led back around towards the importance of long-term loving relationships and some idea of a masculinity and femininity, which is absolutely apocryphal to say these days in many circles. And as I say, this is what I want to try to write about in the next book. And really, like here, I'm just kind of chatting and I'm like, that wasn't convincing. That wasn't convincing. But, to really sort of nail this and make a case for this sort of righteous middle path as a pathway to a better life, frankly, I think is very important.
I'm kind of struck by the description of the good path, the bad path, the middle path, as a comparison to the beginning
of... The good path is the middle path. Sorry, the good path is the middle path.
Well, there was the two sides and then the center, and it's like a mirror of earlier in this conversation, and I wonder how they relate. The talking about taking the cowardly way and not saying things, and then going all the way over here and saying things, or coming back to that center and trying to hold the balance between the two. I just can't help but see the images overlay, and I wonder if you see a relationship there.
Yeah, in this case, I think the middle path in whatever I was talking about, battling academia. I actually don't think it's so good in that situation because it's a bit fence city. So I guess when I'm talking about the middle path with masculinity, I'm talking about, on the one hand, you have a kind of woke emasculation, which is often encouraged these days, when people go soy boys or whatever you want to say, a woke emasculation. And then on the other hand, you've got sort of the grotesquerie of Andrew Tate.
Right.
And so my point here is that there actually is a middle path where you take, a dash of strong man and you actually take care as well. And there is a good middle path. And there is a good middle path there. And unfortunately, just because our world's so stupid and polarizing and lacking nuance, it's, for so many people, it's like one or the other. But yeah, I actually think it's different with what I'm saying for the uni thing. I think when you're fighting the dark forces within the institutions, I actually think at some point you just have to not be a coward and go all in. So I do actually think that they're,
if I can play with the idea a little bit, I wonder if you walking back in and coming back to teaching is kind of the integration, kind of the middle path. I wonder about that.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that as well. Coming back in, and I'll give you another quote here. I mentioned this one in the book, but these are all my controversial ideas. But yeah, Nietzsche says, carefree, mocking, and violent. So wisdom wants us. She is a woman and only ever wants a warrior. It's such a heavy quote. But carefree, mocking, and violent. He says, so wisdom wants us. So you've got to have a certain strength to you, a certain violence, even a certain derision, mocking. It's pretty dark to say these things, and yet carefree. And so I talk about this in the book too, the classic IDW moment when Jordan Peterson was talking with Kathy Newman. And the classic when he says, gotcha. you know, and her whole shield comes down and she kind of giggles and looks a bit feminine and a bit human and vulnerable and all of that. And I'm like, oh, wow, Peterson did it. He was strong, he was violent, but he was also carefree and light. And so, yeah, this is the integration that you're talking about. It's about somehow trying to walk into a space, walk into the battle, and have both a firmness and a lightness in you at the same time, which is the middle path of masculinity. And it is, yeah, I guess also so wisdom wants us, which is the university. So you're right. Your intuitions are spot on. They align with this great line from Nietzsche.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting. No, you know what, talking about masculinity and femininity, I really hope you do write that book, and I would love to read it and talk to you about these things more, because I think it's fascinating to me how difficult those conversations are for people to have. And I think, like, what does it represent for our time and our culture that that the culture fell apart to the point where we had to rediscover what man and woman are? You know, at this really, from the foundations up, we're having this conversation about what does it mean, and you've got the gender ideology that comes in and says that, you know, it's anything can be anything, and both your gender has nothing to do with your biological sex, but also we must remake your body so that your perceived biological sex matches the gender that's in your mind. And then you have this radical feminist, we don't need men sort of thing, and this red pill men, where women are like bifurcated into trad wives and OnlyFans. So, you know, on all of these sides, everybody's just grinding against each other in this really gritty and painful way. And if you try to talk about it, you are upsetting people all over the place, because there's so much touchiness around these things. And like you said, it's really important, I think, to acknowledge that not everybody feels the way it feels according to certain broad descriptions. So there's different expressions of masculinity. There's different expressions of femininity. There's more than one way to feel like you're living a good life. It doesn't follow this really strict formula. And yet there are these archetypes and broad themes that we experience that are universal and more universal masculine, universal feminine. And despite the gender thing making us splinter into a million pieces, we still can't really have civil discussions about these, it feels like. I mean, some of us can, but many people can't. And I get really nasty comments sometimes, some of the worst comments that I get on this channel, which I don't usually get a lot of nasty comments because it's got a pretty smallish viewership of core people who come back around and are pretty supportive and nice. But every now and then there's just the really nasty ones are like this kind of either man hating or woman hating, you know, and it's pretty fascinating to me how charged these issues are.
Yeah. I mean, you said it really well. It's just grinding in so many ways, you know. Men have a few bad experiences for whatever reason. Maybe it's their own fault, and then they become, Andrew Tatey, trad wives, OnlyFans. I mean, the left. And all we're asking for is just a somewhat nuanced conversation, which isn't even that hard. And I mean, I've got like a few chapters in the book even, and this is like an IDW discussion as well, where it's just like, for God's sake, surely we can understand populations where there is some dispersal, there is some variability, but there is also a very meaningful central tendency. And like with men and women, say with something like interest, you know, look at someone like Sabina Hossenfelder on the, you know, Sabina. Do you follow her at all?
I don't know.
On YouTube. You know, she's just an ass-kicking scientist and one of my favorite people to watch on YouTube. She's a woman in science, and she's one of the best. you know? So as far as interests go, men and women shift around. As far as personality goes, there are stronger men, there are stronger women, weaker men, weaker women. So there's a lot of variability in that sort of stuff. In the realm of, I think, attraction and intimacy, I think the variability drops down quite a lot. You watch any kind of movie, you look at the female characters that are cast. I mean, it's not like some man says, I think she's really hot. And some other guy's like, no, not at all. It's like everyone's like, no, we all know. Like there's not a lot of mystery about it. Like we're on the same. And I think more or less similar for men. A man has to carry himself in a certain way in the world. If he's too needy and too desperate or too weak and emasculated, it's just not attractive. And so it's not that hard to have nuanced conversations where you could say, yes, men and women can be anything they want in the world, certainly in terms of career, profession, interests. We may well see different gravitations. We may well see men gravitating a bit more towards engineering and physical stuff and women gravitating a bit more towards, language-based things. And that's fine. We don't need to worry or do anything about that as long as there's not clear discrimination stopping people. And so we can have that. And then we can also say, all right, in the realm of attraction and relationships, it's a little less varied. I mean, look, I just had the nuanced conversation then. It took me 5 minutes. I don't think it was particularly offensive. I think it maps closely to reality. How is that hard? How is it then hard to say these things and say it's not that crazy to have a middle path where you, as a man, you can be somewhat strong, yet also decent, loving, and devoted? Like, how is it that hard? And yet we can't. For sort of 60 years, you even start saying those things and someone on the right's going nuts and someone on the left saying, oh, you're being essentialist. You're saying there's a human nature. I'm like, yeah, I am actually. But yeah, it's crazy. The world is just crisscrossed with just these endless, stupid taboos, which I'm sure we talked about the first time. And it's just like, it doesn't even take long. They fall apart so quickly. And yet, but that's why they exist. They exist because they do fall apart so quickly. And I don't know if they fall apart, all these careers or, I don't know, identities that have been invested in these stupid ideas also fall apart. That's probably the problem. Something like that.
Perhaps. And I think it seems to me that there are so many hurt people who are, when you wrote in the little paragraph that I read about what we're all seeking is a deep human connection. And there's so many people who have missed that opportunity or who have tried and had it denied them. And because for men, in general, heterosexual men, the person with whom they'd be seeking that connection would be a woman. Their pain and their hurt places are with women. The people who hurt them or denied them were women. And for women, if you're heterosexual, the people with whom you'd be seeking that deep connection would be men. And so the people who've let you down or hurt you have been men. And I think that there's so much desire to look for someone to blame and look for a trend to blame. And so we have these sorts of women who are seeking to blame men for all of this and men who are seeking to blame women for all of this, when in fact it's much more universal and deeper and also shallower than that. And it's sort of this we're in a time when things are breaking down for some reason. We've connected so much more broadly. Like we're having how far away are we? It's like
a fair way.
A fair way. Yeah.
Half the world away.
Yeah. And you can have these kinds of dialogues and have shared cultural experiences across amazing distances, which is phenomenal. And that's this massive, broad communication that we have. But at the same time as our communication is becoming broader, it seems to be becoming more shallow. Like we find that our communities, our local communities are drying up and people are, I hear this all the time and I feel it in my own life, that lack of a sense of place and belonging in a tight local community. So broader and shallower. And, and then you have these trends that are sweeping us all up. And I don't know if there is anybody to blame, but I think it's natural to want someone to blame.
Yeah, deep stuff. I mean, what's so interesting is the left and the right both feel the suffering. I mean, the left attempts to reform communities around, I don't know, wacky ideologies and everything from that to like good old-fashioned communism, the right reforms around church, family. I mean, the left reforms around family too, but yeah, the longing is certainly everywhere. Who to blame? I know, right? The unstoppable march of technology, which takes us in directions that we can't control. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the various revolutions, I don't know, which the 1960s have come to be characteristic of. The breakdown of the family, contraception. I mean, those kinds of things make a very big difference when I mean, we're already dealing with something that's in a pretty fine balance. And then you throw, I mean, this is a familiar conversation. You throw something like contraception into the mix. And I mean, like at uni, I teach game theory sometimes, usually in the context of international relations, you know, where you're trying to look at like punishments and incentives and trying to work out how people go about things. You take something which is already quite precarious, like sexual politics, and, you know, you take the fact that men can certainly operate in a pretty womanizing, promiscuous mode. And that my sense is that society has recognized that over thousands of years. And this is why we've created things like marriage, because it's trying to shunt men into, in particular, I think men, it's trying to shunt them onto the good side. And it's not even that marriage necessarily works out. I think I said this before. It's like, do you want to go down like the sort of 30-70 path or the 70-30 path? But yeah, then you throw something like contraception into the mix, and then you have a couple of 100 years of Enlightenment thinking and individualism, and suddenly these ancient kind of customs or traditions, you sort of look at them and go, they're a bit silly, aren't they? And you get rid of them, and then you end up where we are now. And I mean, the point is that conservatism has its flaws, but it also has its strengths, just like progressivism has its flaws and has its strengths. And so, yeah, I feel like we've done away with some of these institutions at our peril, which brings us back to the earlier discussion of therapy and connection and deeper morality. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, no one's to blame much. I mean, we're swept along in all of this, aren't we? But to the extent that we can think for ourselves and we can look at the long arc and we can have deep and nuanced discussions, yeah, maybe we can tilt things in a better direction, back towards human connection in all its forms. But yeah, it's hard, right?
Yeah, it is. It's also, I think it's such an interesting time to be alive. I mean,
yeah, it sure is that.
Like, there's this tendency for people to be really doom and gloom and kind of fatalistic and even nihilistic, and look at what's going on, like what's happening in politics, what's happening in the world, and really be just have a very dark view of it. But we also live at a time when most of our children survive infancy and childhood, and where we have a lot of good food. Almost everybody has good food available that they can eat, and people are living fairly good lives for the most part. I mean, there are people who are suffering horribly in the world, but in a lot of the Western cultures where people are on fire over things like gender and what clothes people are allowed to wear and what public restrooms people are allowed to go into, and the fact that we have so many public restrooms available is kind of a hallmark that we've got a lot of services to offer people. I don't know. I don't know. That's not to say that there aren't problems that need to be worked on. I obviously think that, but it's interesting how the balance if you listen to headlines and public discourse, you get this sense that things are all like everything's burning down, when in fact we're able to have these really amazing, interesting, dynamic philosophical dialogues like the ones you cover in your book, like the kinds of things we get to dip into in our discussions. And I don't know, it seems like it's a time of a lot of vibrance and thought, as well as some major real concern.
Well, when you're talking, the old saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good, comes to mind. if our model, I mean, this is why the left, I mean, I don't know, maybe fails is a heavy word, but this is why it can struggle with all of this is it's like, yeah, things could be a lot better, but boy, have we come a long way. And the idea of perfecting humanity and society, as nice as it would be, is extremely dangerous and can lead to far worse outcomes when you try to top-down engineer it. So, yeah, to recognize with gratitude that we've come pretty far. Yeah, it is a remarkable time, and we are extremely lucky. But I don't know, the human mind also, I mean, we're naturally problem-solving creatures. I mean, that's fundamentally, I mean, all life is about problem-solving. Even if you're a tree, you're trying to grow towards the light, and it's just fewer problems in a way. So yeah, maybe we're just susceptible to hoovering up more and more problems without. It's hard for us to recognize what we've achieved. So I think we're hardwired that way, and the media feeds that. But yeah, it is remarkable times.
That's one of my favorite sayings. Perfect and is the enemy of the good. Yeah.
Maybe I heard it in my 20s and didn't notice, because I think sometimes you have to, especially if you're on the left in your 20s, I think you sort of often have to do a bit of living and try to build things and make things work and realize that reality exists, and it's quite a hard taskmaster. And when you come up against reality, and you also come across, frankly, how lazy people are and how much they whinge. And then you hear the perfect is the enemy of the good a little later, and you're like, oh yeah, I see now. I see now. But sometimes I think, it does take a bit of life experience, and coming across the limitations of, the human organism, and realizing that you have to work with those very serious limitations, or not even necessarily limitations, but just boundaries. And once you realize you have to work with those boundaries, and, the human is not a blank slate, we're not infinitely malleable, then, the perfect is the enemy of the good makes a lot of sense. And you realize that some version of moderate liberalism is easily the best we have at the moment. Hopefully one that takes a bit from conservatism and a bit from progressivism.
To find that middle path.
Yeah. And I think, obviously there's vast swathes of conservatives who sort of still get the value of things like long-term relationships and family, and maybe the left needs to learn a bit from that at the moment. Just like probably the conservatives 30 or 40 years ago needed to be more open-minded. But yeah, the pendulum swings.
The balance.
That's for sure. Yeah.
It's really nice to talk with you, Jamie. I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation today. Do you feel like there's anything we didn't get to that we should have, or anything that's left unsaid that you want to circle back to?
Today was good. I wasn't sure I was going to say all that stuff. Like I had it's always locked and loaded in there somewhere. Because I've done a few podcasts over the last couple of weeks, and I'm like, I'm just saying the same old stuff about the book, which is fine.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but I want to do the deeper stuff. And I'm like, look at that. I think we just did it. So I'm pretty excited about that. So yeah, good conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I hope you write the Men and Women book, and
it'll get written. It's just, life, personal time. Stuff. I don't know. Somewhere in the next year or two, it will get written. But thank you.
Good. Well, where can people find you if you want to say it out loud, and where can people buy the book?
Oh yeah, it's fine. Yeah, so I am on X, Jamie Q Roberts. We don't say tweet anymore. I post a bit. I'm trying to do it more. I think I have a YouTube channel, though I've been a little quiet there for a while. But yeah, I think X is probably the best place to find me if you want to send me a message. And yeah, the book, The Intellectual Dark Web, it's out in a couple of days. I guess by the time this airs, it's probably out 17th. So yeah, you'll find it on the internet, no problem. You type in intellectual dark web Roberts, and just make sure you don't try to buy the cancelled book. But you'll be able to tell the difference between the two. The new one has a black cover. So
nice. Yeah. Well, I'll put links to anything you want me to share in the description, and so people can check it out there. And I hope they go and check out your work. And I look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie.